Dear students, let us begin a new chapter, the Shoemaker. What are the learning outcomes? Read the text and understand the setting, the background, and the context. Understand the formation of compound words. Learn the use of non finite verbs. Understand the difference between pronunciation of words that function as verbs as well as nouns. Learn to write a formal letter. So, all these things we will get to know after reading this chapter. Literary appreciation means here a classic novel expresses artistic qualities. It is an expression of life and it stands the test of time. The work is usually considered to be a representation of the period in which it was written, and the work has a lasting impact and recognition. Warm up is here. Imagine meeting a close family member after a long time. What would you do? How would you feel? What would you do if he or she does not recognize you? So, this is the situation which has been given over here. What would happen? Good day, said Munir Defarge. Munir means here a gentleman. This is a French word. Looking down at the white head that bent low over the shoemaking. It was raised for a moment, and a very faint voice responded to the salutation as if it were at a distance. So you can say that the man, gentleman Defarge, said good day, and the man who was having white head was looking down, and he was busy while making shoes, and hearing the word good day, the man just raised his head for a while, for a moment. It seemed that he was hearing the words from a long distance. This is the meaning. Even he replied, good day. Further, you are still hard at work, I see. After a long silence, the head was lifted for another moment, and the voice replied, yes, I am working. This time, a pair of haggard eyes, haggard means a very weak, had looked at the questioner before the face had dropped again. Yeah, dear students, when he was questioned, so he replied second time, raising his head, that yeah, still he was busy at his work, and the voice replied, yes, I am working. It means he was working. So this time, a pair of haggard eyes had looked at the questioner. Questioner means the person who had asked him, you are still hard at work. So before the face had dropped again, it means once he looked up and then he dropped his eyes just the very moment. The faintness of the voice was pitiable. Pitiable means full of mercy, sympathy, and dreadful. There was a fright. So it was not the faintness of physical weakness, though confinement means imprisonment, and hard fare no doubt had their part in it. Its deplorable peculiarity was that it was the faintness of solitude and disuse. It was like the last feeble echo of a sound made long and long ago. So you can say that that pitiable condition was not because of being very weak, but it was due to long confinement in the prison, and the faintness in his voice was due to solitude. Solitude means that loneliness, which he had led a very lonely life in the imprisonment. So that's why his voice was rather weak. I want, said Defarge, who had not removed his gaze. Gaze means look. From the shoemaker, to let in a little more light here. You can bear a little more. So Defarge said that I want that there must be a somewhat rather bright light in that room, and still he was gazing, means looking at that shoemaker. The shoemaker stopped his work, looked with a vacant air of listening at the floor on one side of him, then similarly at the floor on the other side of him, and then upward at the speaker. So at this time, the shoemaker looked up again at the questioner, and even first of all he looked at the one side, then other side of the floor, and then upward at the speaker. So this was the condition of that shoemaker. The half open door was opened a little further. A broad ray of light fell into the garret. Garret means that room, okay, the particular top floor or attic room, and showed the workman with an unfurnished shoe upon his lap, pausing in his labor, his few common tools. Tools means here instruments, and various means many scraps of leather, scraps, different strips of leather were at his feet and on his bench. He had a white beard, raggedly cut. Raggedly means here worn out, cut but not very long, a hollow face and exceedingly bright eyes. His yellow rags of shirt, rag means here old, of shirt lay open at the throat and showed his body to be withered. Withered means here wrinkled and worn because of being very old. He and his old canvas frock means here clothing of coarse material, rough material, okay, loose stockings, and all his wore tatters. Tatters means here just old one, torn one, okay, torn pieces of clothes, had in a long seclusion. Seclusion means just aloofed from direct light and air, faded down to such a dull uniformity of parchment yellow that it would have been hard to say which was which. So you can say that the scenario is that the particular person who was at the door. So when the door was opened little further in order to have much more light in the room, so the man who was just working with the shoes, now he stopped for a while and he kept the shoe which he was making in his lap, and stops for a while. He stops his work for a while, and then onlookers found that some other kinds of tools they were lying in the room, as well as some of the strips of leather they were also lying nearby his feet and on the bench. He was wearing very torn pieces of clothes, and he was very weak. His face was hollow, his eyes were only perhaps he was having a kind of hope, so there was something shining in his eyes, and you can say that he was wearing his old canvas frock. It was also tattered, and long stockings he was wearing, but you can see through this description that he had been confined for a long time in that cell. So even that light was creating a problem for him. So there are some meanings here. Munir means a title for form of address used to address a French speaking man. Salutation means something that you say to welcome or say hello to somebody. Haggard means exhausted or tired and unwell, especially from fatigue, worry, or suffering. Confinement means the state of being forced to stay in a closed space or prison. Deplorable means very bad and unacceptable over here. Peculiarity means here oddity, garret, top floor, or attic. So these we have done. Okay. He had put up a hand between his eyes and the light, and the very bones of it seemed transparent. So he sat with a steadfastly vacant gaze. Pausing in the work, he never looked at the figure before him, without first looking down on the side of himself, then on that, as if he had lost the habit of associating place with sound. He never spoke without first wandering in this manner and forgetting to speak. So you can say that when there was enough light in the room because of opening the door, so he was speechless. The shoemaker was speechless, and he was trying to hide his eyes uh, with the help of his palm. And when he was doing this, so because of the light, because of that particular, especially the light which was coming through the door, even his bones were transparent, could be seen just like X-ray. Okay, so even perhaps he was speechless because he had not been in the habit of talking to anyone else, being imprisoned for a long time. So perhaps he had forgotten to speak in such a manner. He was thinking what to say at that moment. Mr. Lorry came silently forward, leaving Lucy, the shoemaker's daughter, by the door. When he had stood for a minute or two by the side of Defarge, the shoemaker looked up. He showed no surprise at seeing another figure, but the unsteady fingers of one of his hands strayed to his lips as he looked at it. His lips and his nails were of the same pale uh, lead color, and then the hand dropped to his work, and he once more bent over the shoe. The look and the accent had occupied but an instant. "You have a visitor, you see," said Munir Defarge. "What did you say?" So you can say that for in this part, Mr. Lorry came silently forward, leaving Lucy, who wanted to visit her father, shoemaker's daughter. So she was at the door, and when he had stood for a minute or two by the side of Defarge, the shoemaker had looked up, and he showed no surprise at seeing another person at the door. But the unsteady fingers of one of his hands strayed to his lips as he looked at it. It means perhaps it was the sign of surprise or amazement. So even those nails and fingers, they were also in the same color. It means very weak. And then he dropped his hand. It means to his work. And at this again he mentioned, "You have a visitor, you see," said Monier Defarge. "What did you say?" "Here is a visitor." The shoemaker looked up as before, but without removing a hand from his work. It means again he was reminded that somebody wanted to meet him, but at this time shoemaker looked up, but he was not showing any surprise, and he did not stop his work. He kept on making shoe. "Come," said Defarge, "here is Munir, who knows a well-made shoe when he sees one. Show him that shoe you are working on. Take it, Munir." So again Defarge said that let us come, gentlemen. We would like to see the beautiful, the good quality shoe as the shoemaker is making. Mr. Lorry took it in his hand. It means Mr. Lorry took the shoe in his hand in order to look it. tell Munir what kind of shoe it is and the maker's name. So further Mr. Lorry asked the shoemaker what is the name of that maker of the shoe and what kind of the quality of the shoe. So there was a longer pause than usual before the shoemaker replied. So you can that shoemaker was not able to utter even a single word. He was taking a long pause. I forgot what it was you asked me. What did you say? So again he was saying that perhaps he had forgotten what he was being asked. So here meaning is written steadfastly means in a firm and unwavering manner. Further lines from the text are, I said, couldn't you describe the kind of shoe for Munir's information? It means whether you would not like to give the information about the shoe to the gentleman. It is a lady's shoe. It is a young lady's walking shoe. It is in the present mode. I never saw the mode. I have had a pattern in my hand. He glanced means looked at the shoe with some little passing touch of pride. So you can see that now he is explaining about the shoe, and he describes that the shoe was of a lady one, and it is a walking shoe, and it is in the progressive mode, present mode. And although he had never saw the mode, but the pattern was in his hand, and he looked at the shoe with some little passing touch of pride. So he was feeling pride on making the shoe. And the maker's name, said Defarge. Defarge asked again, who is the maker of the shoe? Now that he had no work to hold, he laid the knuckles of the right hand, knuckles the joint of the fingers over here, right hand in the hollow of the left, and then the knuckles of the left hand in the hollow of the right, and then passed a hand across his beard chin, and so on in regular changes, without a moment's intermission. The task of recalling him from the vagrancy into which he always sank when he had spoken was like recalling some very weak person from a swoon, or endeavoring in the hope of some disclosure to stay the spirit of a fast dying man. So you can say that when he was asked about the maker of the shoe, so he was just performing in such a way that perhaps he had forgotten what he was going to say, and he was recalling, perhaps he had forgotten all about even his name and the maker's name. So it happens actually with the weak one or the dying man. Did you ask me for my name? Further, he asked whether he was asked about his name. Assuredly, I did. It means Mr. Lorry said this. Of course, he asked his name. 105 North Tower. So he began to tell another thing. Is that all? Only this 105 North Tower? With a weary sound that was not a sigh nor a groan. Groan means here the cry or weep for because of sadness. He went to work again until the silence was again broken. His haggard eyes turned to Defarge as if he would have transferred the question to him, but as no help came from that quarter, they turned back on the questioner when they had sought the ground. So actually he was looking at the Defarge, but perhaps he was having no reply, and again the man was looking at the questioner in order to seek the answer. I am not a shoemaker by trade. No, I was not a shoemaker by trade. I learnt it here. I taught myself. I asked leave to. So actually, further he replied that he was not a professional shoemaker, and whatever he had learnt, being only in the imprisonment, and he had taught himself to make shoes. Then I asked leave to. He lapsed away even for minutes, ringing those measured changes on his hands. The whole time his eyes came slowly back at last to the face from which they had wandered. When they rested on it, he started and resumed in the manner of a sleeper that moment awake, reverting to a subject of last night. So actually again he was in the same condition, he was having lapses of memory, and again he began to see that shoe and he began to think what he was being asked. Perhaps he wanted to resume the work. So this was happening actually as the person who was sleeping for a long time, or he was being confined, he might have been asked. So he was just acting in this way. I asked to leave to teach myself, and I got it with much difficulty after a long while, and I have made shoes ever since. So further he said that even he had asked himself to he asked leave to teach himself, but even he got it with much difficulty, and since then he is making shoes. So this was to be replied by the shoemaker. He stared at her with a fearful look, and after a while his lips began to form some words, though no sound proceeded from them. By degrees, in the pauses of his quick and labored breathing, he was heard to say, "What is this?" So, actually, when the lady, it means Lucy, went with him, he looked at her gazefully and said nothing. But even without sound, perhaps something was being transferred. So, in the long pauses, even quickly, he labored breathing. It means it was very difficult, and his eyes were surprised to see. Perhaps he was able to recognize, and he only could say, "What is this?" With tears streaming down her face, she put her two hands to her lips and kissed them to him. So, this was to be very affectionate over there between a daughter and father. So, you are not the gaoler's daughter. Gaoler's means here jailer. Perhaps he asked whether she was not the daughter of a jailer. She sighed no. Who are you? Then further he asked who she was. Not yet trusting the tones of her voice, she sat down on the bench beside him. He recoiled, but she laid her hand upon his arm. A strange thrill struck him when she did so, and visibly passed over his frame. He laid the knife down softly as he sat staring at her. Advancing his hand little by little, he took it up and looked at it. So you can see that when she was just telling about herself and she laid her hand in the palm or in the hand of her father, so then he left his work, he put down his knife as he was using in order to make the shoes, and then he was also looking at her. So in the midst of the action he went astray, and with another deep sigh fell to work at his shoemaking. But taking a long breath, again he took up his work and he began to make shoes. So this is very adventurous, very pathetic story, and nothing he disclosed in front of his daughter. Hopefully students, you have got to know all the things. Thank you.